Vacation, an 8-letter word that for most of us conjures up thoughts of temporary relief from life. The idea of bathing under the sun, drinking more alcohol than our stomach can contain, and just overall being lazy for a couple of weeks is symptomatic of the human experience. For the infelicitous characters in horror films, the general idea is more to prevent you from going to any of these deadly rural or so-called scenic places that incur a much higher fee than the extortionate airport handling fees that may drain you, as these excursions may instead drain the colour from your skin rather than tanning it. So with that in mind, I'm Ellie with What Culture here with 10 more terrifying vacation horror movies. Number 10, Rest Stop. Rest Stop is a 2006 film that shows the inundated experience that the aspirant actress Nicole, whose destitute tale we observe in all of its unequivocal trepidation, goes quickly awry when deciding to make a pit stop when she should have kept driving. She encounters a serial killer who hunts her down like he was terminally ill and it was the last thing to tick off his bucket list. This film is enough to deter even the most desperate of people to not make a pit stop, and it doesn't stall on the incessant action for even a second. Number 9, Tourist Trap. Tourist Trap is habitually frightening with its gritty grindhouse aesthetic, only attributing to every unexpected find as the protagonists go further down the rabbit hole. Even imbuing the patented nightmarish trademark that is the inanimate yet autonomic dolls becoming an intrusive element of the fear factor. If you've encountered this movie before, then you're probably already trying to banish the maniacal screams of the aforementioned from your mind as you watch this. Our sincerest apologies if you fell into our trap. On the subject of apologies, whoever edited the original trailer together has some serious explaining to do, as somehow this inexplicably gruesome and horrific affair was somehow initially rated PG, with subsequent home releases slightly adjusting that to an X or 18 depending on which part of the Atlantic Ocean you fall on. Number 8, Wrong Turn. Not to be confused with its more scintillatingly depressive counterpart of the same name, the original Wrong Turn was a step in the right direction for a genre that had become stale and oversaturated by knife-wielding boogeymen. When a group of college students decide to go on a rock climbing expedition during their much-coveted downtime, things quickly go awry as inhuman yet humanoid-looking beings immediately unhinge these poor students, which in one scene is more literal than allegorical. And as they become further embroiled in this dire situation, 3 of the unsettling locals begin to hunt and pick them off individually in a plot reminiscent of the aforementioned knife-wielding boogeyman, but with the twist of the killers actually having a reason to perpetuate such dastardly acts. They've invaded their land where they've remained sheltered from the rest of civilization. Is what we would say if this film was as intellectually charged as that, but in reality it's just a visceral, unflinching account of what can happen when you stumble into lands occupied by deranged cannibalistic natives. Number 7, Cabin Fever. One exception that distinguishes Cabin Fever from its surrounding competition is its predominant focus on body horror, as opposed to the incestuous, mutated, mutilated, or just sadism and maliciousness we've come to expect. While it does imbue a couple of those factors, for once, the killer is the most natural and invincible of all organisms, and it's one that infects your body before affecting it as it scours around your body like a plague of locusts descending on the harvest. The harbinger of death in this film could be hiding under any leaky faucet, living on the bark of a tree, or even parasitically capitulating itself into your closest compadre. The terror of Cabin Fever is indeed infectious. Number 6, Open Water and 47 Meters Down. We're going for a double trouble creature feature for this entry, and good lord, if they don't share the most insanely terrifying concept between them, then you've probably seen far too many movies for a lifetime. Now, these shark-oriented flicks aren't exactly Jaws, but then again, will any creature flick ever surpass Jaws? Likely not. The slight differences between Open Water are genuinely minimal, but ingeniously captivating. Open Water is essentially a story centered around an innocent boat trip, hastily turning deadly as 2 innocent lovebirds become stranded in the middle of the ocean, only to be stalked by, well, you get the idea. Whereas 47 Meters Down doesn't exhaust its simple premise, but instead uses it to its advantage, as it takes a basic foundation and builds on it exponentially to create incredulous tension. 2 women board a shark cage for a spot of diving, only for the chain tethering them to the boat to completely detach. Whatever your preference, there is no irreverence on show, only irrefutable, resplendently primal fear. Number 5, The Hills Have Eyes. It's difficult to differentiate the classic Wes Craven flick from its contemporary counterpart. Both are classics in their own right. Both are contemptuous towards their victims in their ritualistic massacring of anyone in sight. And yes, just like Wrong Turn earlier, we're delighted to highlight the fact that they both contain deplorable cannibalistic inbreds. Akin to a variety of other films listed, The Hills Have Eyes follows a large ensemble of family members, both in perpetration and victimization, inhabiting an almost desolate wasteland. Some vacationing in their caravan and some living there indefinitely, probably in something very favela-esque. Which, in other words, is a declaration from both families that they're searching for trouble. Trouble inevitably does rear its butt-ugly head, answering the call with all the enthusiasm of Alexander Graham Bell upon receiving his first ever ring. Number 4. Wolf Creek. In a similar vein to multiple other movies on this list, Wolf Creek seems like an exercise in mundanity on paper, or perhaps simply just uninspired. Watching the film in its entirety, however, is a completely harrowing experience unlike many others, ultimately leaving your fingers without nails, if not your mentality devoid of sanity. When venturing through the vacuous, unsuspecting wilderness of the Australian outback, a group of stereotypical, ideologically airheaded teens encounters a local man. What ensues is nothing but bereavement for nearly all involved. The stomach-churning amusement hits an all-new level of disturbing malevolence as the hunter from down under excessively brutalizes, mutilates and cultivates these candescent lambs to the slaughter, with all the reprehensible glee of a megalomaniac watching his favourite snuff film. Number 3. The Evil Dead. The progenitor of the cabin in the woods subgenre that infiltrated the horror genre for many generations to come, 1981's Evil Dead, directed by a young up-and-coming Sam Raimi of all people, and shot on a shoestring budget, is not only an exercise in endearment to the craft of filmmaking, it's also an example of homogenized horror. As Ash Williams and friends endeavour on a small trip away in the silent woods where nothing can be heard, including the spine-chilling screams of young adults as they're gradually indoctrinated into a manifestation of evil. As they're torn asunder, they quickly come across an interesting read. A little book called the Necronomicon, which for those of us that did our homework in the studies of the occult will be brisk to realise that this translates to the Book of the Dead. If only our protagonists knew this prior to opening the book, and with it an all-new dimension of insipidly brazen and maliciously unquenchable spirits to wreak havoc inside this previously scenic setting. Number 2. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's crazy just how many of these entries revolve around some sort of psychopath in a remote location terrorizing young people as they endeavor to enjoy a nice, serene holiday in a place that clearly isn't designed for sunbathing, sex, and cocktails. In fairness, the victims of Leatherface weren't legitimately going to vacation in the dusky, dusty deserts of central USA, not until the megalomaniac they thought they were helping forced their hand, which, in an egregious twist of fate, they kind of were. After picking up a hitchhiker who imminently comes across as more than unsettling from the moment he enters the vehicle, and not just because his face is literally coated in blood, these would-be vacationers soon have to resort to seeking help in the local area after he inevitably attacks one of them. Believing they've found their much sought-after refuge, they soon realise that what they've actually entered is a waking nightmare, and the events that transpire in this rustic setting are as sadistic as they are cataclysmic. The genuine terror in this flick is the incessant notion that in this humongous barren landscape, nowhere is safe. There is nowhere to run or hide, and even if you were to succeed in both, you will be hunted, skinned, and eaten by a primal family of malevolent hillbillies. Number 1. The Descent. Being an explorer, swiftly sifting through a cave sounds like a riveting experience, doesn't it? What could make it better, you ask? Well, how about we attach a group of your most endeared friends to the itinerary? You know what could potentially be the icing on the cake? If there wasn't the presence of hostile, unearthly, godforsaken monsters lurking around in its deepest depths. In the midst of enduring tragedy in which her husband and daughter are, for lack of a better word, eviscerated, which coincidentally also occurs during a vacation, our protagonist Sarah decides to try to take her mind off things as she takes off on an endeavour that assimilates the serenity of a perversely dangerous tunnelling trip. The foreboding atmosphere isn't quite imminent until they run into the personification, or objectification, or maybe alienation of bloodthirsty bottom dwellers. A gripping thrill ride from the epilogue, the titular descent soon becomes a descent into madness as it develops from a desperate tale of sadness, evoking fear, tears, and if you need to forget what you just witnessed, which you probably will, a lot of beers.